You're sitting in the passenger seat. Your friend is driving. Suddenly, red and blue lights flash behind you, but this isn't local police. The vehicle says, ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The officer walks up, leans toward your window, and asks you a question. What you say in the next 10 seconds could change your life forever. Most passengers make one critical mistake here. They think because they're not the driver, they're safe. They think they can just stay quiet and hope the officer ignores them, but here's the thing. ICE agents are trained to use passengers as leverage, and most passengers have no idea what rights they actually have. Every year, thousands of passengers in this country give up their constitutional rights during traffic stops because nobody ever taught them what to say. They think cooperation means answering every question. They think being honest means volunteering information nobody asked for. But here's the reality. I've analyzed hundreds of immigration cases and studied the Supreme Court rulings that protect you. And I've identified 3 words that every passenger needs to memorize before their next car ride. 3 words that invoke your Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Miss these words, and you could talk yourself into a detention facility. Use them correctly, and you've built the strongest legal shield the Constitution offers. This is educational content only. Not legal advice, but this could be the most important video you watch this year. Let's break down exactly what to say. Here's what most passengers get wrong. They think silence alone protects them. You stay quiet, you don't answer, you think you're safe. But the Supreme Court destroyed that assumption in 2013 with a case called Salinas versus Texas. In that case, a man stayed silent when police asked him questions. He didn't say anything incriminating, he just went quiet. And the Supreme Court ruled that his silence could be used against him in court. Why? Because he never explicitly invoked his Fifth Amendment right. He never said the magic words. So what are those words? I plead the Fifth. 5 syllables, 3 words. Say them calmly, say them clearly. Say them once. That's it. Here's how this plays out in real life. The ICE agent looks at you in the passenger seat and says, "Where were you born?" The wrong way to handle this? You panic. You say nothing. You look away. You fidget. The agent notes your nervous behavior. Later, in court, the prosecutor argues your silence showed consciousness of guilt. The right way? You look at the agent calmly and say, "I plead the Fifth." The agent says, "I'm just asking a simple question. Where were you born?" You say, "I plead the Fifth." The agent says, "If you have nothing to hide, just answer the question." You say, "I plead the Fifth." Same words. Every time. No variations, no explanations, no apologies. This is the first phrase every passenger must memorize. But invoking your Fifth Amendment right doesn't mean the stop is over. Not by a long shot. Because while you're protected from self-incrimination, ICE agents have another tool. They can ask to search the vehicle. They can ask to search your belongings. They can even ask to search your person. And here's where passengers make their second critical mistake. They think because the officer is asking nicely, they have to say yes. They think refusing a search makes them look guilty. But here's what the Fourth Amendment actually says. You have the right to be free from unreasonable searches, and a search without a warrant, without your consent, and without probable cause is unreasonable. The exact words you need? I do not consent to searches. Let me show you how this works. The ICE agent says, "Do you mind if I take a look through your bag? The wrong way?" You hesitate. You say, "Well, I guess, if you have to." Congratulations! You just gave consent. Anything they find is now admissible in court. The right way? You say clearly, "I do not consent to searches." The agent says, "I'm just trying to make sure everyone's safe here." You say, "I understand, officer. I do not consent to searches." The agent says, "If you're not hiding anything, what's the problem?" You say, "I do not consent to searches." Notice something important here. You're not being rude. You're not arguing. You're not explaining your reasons. You're simply stating your constitutional position. Calmly, clearly, repeatedly. Now here's where it gets tricky, and most passengers don't know this part. The Supreme Court ruled in Maryland versus Wilson in 1997 that officers can order passengers out of a vehicle during a traffic stop. That's right. Even though you're not the driver, even though you did nothing wrong, the officer can legally tell you to step out of the car. So what do you do when this happens? You comply. You get out of the car. Fighting a lawful order on the roadside is dangerous and illegal. But here's the critical distinction. You can be ordered out of the car. That doesn't mean you're being detained. That doesn't mean you have to answer questions. That doesn't mean they can search you. Which brings us to the third phrase every passenger must know. Am I being detained? This question matters because it forces the officer to clarify your status. There are only 2 possibilities. Now, either you're free to go or you're being detained. If you're being detained, the officer needs reasonable suspicion that you've committed a crime. Without that, they're violating your Fourth Amendment rights. Here's the scenario. You've stepped out of the vehicle as ordered. The ICE agent starts asking you questions. Where do you work? Where do you live? Can I see some identification? The wrong way? You start answering. You pull out your wallet. You show your ID, even though, in most states, passengers have no legal obligation to identify themselves during a traffic stop. The right way? You ask calmly. Am I being detained? If the agent says no, you say, then I'm exercising my right to remain silent. I plead the Fifth. If the agent says yes, you say, I'm invoking my right to an attorney. I plead the Fifth. Either way, you've protected yourself. Let me show you the complete sequence of how a passenger should handle an ICE stop. The vehicle pulls over. You keep your hands visible. The agent approaches. The agent asks, where are you from? You say, I plead the Fifth. The agent asks, can I see your ID? You say, I plead the Fifth. I do not consent to searches. The agent says, step out of the vehicle. You step out calmly. You keep your hands visible. The agent asks, where were you born? You say, I plead the Fifth. The agent asks, can I look through your bag? You say, I do not consent to searches. The agent seems frustrated. The agent says, you're making this harder than it needs to be. You say calmly, am I being detained? Notice what you're not doing. You're not arguing. You're not explaining. You're not volunteering information. You're not giving them anything they can use against you later in court. But here's something most people don't understand about ICE stops specifically. The rules are different than regular police stops. During a routine traffic stop, the Supreme Court ruled in Rodriguez versus United States that officers cannot extend the stop beyond its original purpose without reasonable suspicion. But ICE operates under different authority. They're not just enforcing traffic laws, they're enforcing immigration law, which means the conversation they want to have with you has nothing to do with why the vehicle was pulled over. This is exactly why your three phrases matter so much. Every question they ask you is designed to gather evidence for an immigration case. Every friendly inquiry is an investigation, and you are not required to participate in your own investigation. Here's what happens if you do talk. Let's say you're a passenger. You're a legal resident. You have nothing to hide. The ICE agent asks where you were born. You say Mexico, but I'm a citizen now. The agent asks when you became a citizen. You say, I think it was 2012. The agent asks for documentation. You say, I don't have it on me. Now the agent has reasonable suspicion to detain you, not because you did anything wrong, but because you volunteered information that created questions. Questions lead to detention. Detention leads to investigation. Investigation leads to court dates, lawyers, and months of stress. All because you thought being helpful was the right approach. Now let's talk about what happens if the ICE agent violates your rights anyway. Because here's the reality. Knowing your rights doesn't mean officers will respect them. Sometimes they'll search you anyway. Sometimes they'll detain you without reasonable suspicion. Sometimes they'll pressure you until you feel like you have no choice but to comply. What do? First, you stay calm. You do not physically resist. The fight is never on the roadside. The fight is in court. Second, you clearly state your rights one more time. I do not consent to this search. I plead the Fifth. Am I being detained? Third, you remember everything. The officer's name, if they give it, the badge number, the time, the location, what was said, what was done. Because if your rights were violated, that's how your lawyer gets evidence thrown out. That's how cases get dismissed. That's how you win. Let me give you all three phrases one more time. Memorize these. Phrase 1, I plead the Fifth. Use this anytime you're asked a question you don't want to answer, which should be every question during an ICE stop. Phrase 2, I do not consent to searches. Use this anytime an agent asks to look through your belongings, your bag, your pockets, anything. Phrase 3, am I being detained? Use this to clarify your status and determine whether you're free to leave or whether the agent has reasonable suspicion to hold you. Print these out. Put them in your wallet. Practice saying them until they feel natural, because when those lights flash behind you, you will not have time to think. You will not have time to Google your rights. You will only have time to react, and your reaction needs to be automatic. One more thing. If you're in a vehicle with someone who might be undocumented, these phrases become even more critical. Your silence protects them. Your assertion of rights protects them. By refusing to answer questions about yourself, you're also refusing to provide information that could be used against others in the vehicle. The Fifth Amendment isn't just about protecting yourself. In a situation like this, it protects everyone. If you found this helpful, I'd appreciate a subscribe. The more people who understand their rights, the fewer people who get trapped by questions they didn't have to answer. Here's the bottom line. Being a passenger in a vehicle during an ICE stop is scary. But you have constitutional rights that protect you. The Fourth Amendment protects you from unreasonable searches. The Fifth Amendment protects you from being forced to incriminate yourself. These aren't just words on paper. They're shields, but shields only work if you use them. And the only way to use them is to know the exact words to say. I plead the Fifth. I do not consent to searches. Am I being detained? 3 phrases, 3 shields. Remember them. Because the smartest passengers aren't the ones who talk the most. They're the ones who know when to stop talking